on their land you encroaching. Have a heart. Saving one gorilla can make a difference. It's our mountain gorillas, we got to protect them. Saving one gorilla can make a difference. Protect the mountain gorillas, make a difference. Rafiki was a friend, so why did you kill him? Why did you spare him? A boss, a silverback, rest in peace, Raf. The killing has to cease. They got hands like you, feet like you. They're just like you. Saving one gorilla can make a difference. It's our mountain gorillas, we got to protect them. Saving one gorilla can make a difference. Protect the mountain gorillas, make a difference.
Gorillas are herbivores. They're generally passive animals, but the silverback will defend its troop if threatened. Beating on my chest like a silverback.
Team Gorilla, Team Gorilla.
If you care, you can help. You're just like us. Same DNA.
Saving one gorilla can make a difference. It's our mountain gorillas, we got to protect them. Saving one gorilla can make a difference. Protect the mountain gorillas, make a difference. They face extinction, habitat shrinking. Have a heart, a little conviction. I see old approaching, on their land you encroaching. Have a heart. Saving one gorilla can make a difference. It's our mountain gorillas, we got to protect them. Saving one gorilla can make a difference. Protect the mountain gorillas, make a difference. Rafiki was a friend, so why did you kill him? Why did you spare him? A boss, a silverback, rest in peace, Raf. The killing has to cease. They got hands like you, feet like you. They're just like you. Saving one gorilla can make a difference. It's our mountain gorillas, we got to protect them. Saving one gorilla can make a difference. Protect the mountain gorillas, make a difference.
Gorillas are herbivores. They're generally passive animals, but the silverback will defend its troop if threatened. Beating on my chest like a silverback.
Team Gorilla, Team Gorilla.
If you care, you can help. You're just like us. Same DNA.
Saving one gorilla can make a difference. It's our mountain gorillas, we got to protect them. Saving one gorilla can make a difference. Protect the mountain gorillas, make a difference. They face extinction, habitat shrinking. Have a heart, a little conviction. I see all the poaching, on their land you encroaching. Have a heart. Saving one gorilla can make a difference. It's our mountain gorillas, we got to protect them. Saving one gorilla can make a difference. Protect the mountain gorillas, make a difference. Rafiki was a friend, so why did you kill him? Why did you spare him? A boss, a silverback. Rest in peace, Rafiki. The killing has to cease. They got hands like you, feet like you. They're just like you. Saving one gorilla can make a difference. It's our mountain gorillas, we got to protect them. Saving one gorilla can make a difference. Protect the mountain gorillas, make a difference.
Gorillas are herbivores. They're generally passive animals, but the silverback will defend its troop if threatened. Beating on my chest like a silverback.
Team Gorilla, Team Gorilla.
If you care, you can help. You're just like us. Same DNA.
Saving one gorilla can make a difference. It's our mountain gorillas, we got to
Okay.
protect them. Saving one gorilla can make a difference.
If we could just have a little bit of quiet here.
Protect the mountain.
Welcome. Welcome, everyone, to the Explorers Club. Shh. Shh. Thank you. It's a thrill to see everybody here and a packed room. For those of you who still want to get a book, Walking with the Gorillas by Dr. Gladys, she'll be out there at the end of the presentation, and she'll be able to sign another book for you. I want to welcome everybody back to the Explorers Club after an incredible and successful ECAD weekend, filled with amazing and fascinating people who joined us from all over the globe. Tonight, we're thrilled to welcome a few of our esteemed members from Uganda, Madagascar. But first, please sit back and enjoy this 10-minute film, the Gorilla Trekking film, by Allison Haynes, made in 2021 during COVID, and her production company, One Health Productions, in conjunction with the Uganda Wildlife Authority, Conservation Through Public Health, the International Gorilla Conservation Program, and finally, Rewild and Conservation International. This film is watched by everyone who enters Uganda. So sit back, it's a 10-minute film, and enjoy the film.
We're in a remote corner of the world, but not so remote. Bwindi is found in southwestern Uganda, bordering the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is within East Africa. In this forest alone, we don't only have the mountain gorillas, but we have chimpanzees. We also have elephants. We have over 300 species of birds. We have so many butterflies. We have all kinds of different monkeys.
Bwindi Impenetrable National Park is a World Heritage Site. Bwindi has 22 habituated gorilla groups, and Mogainga has 1. Bwindi is Pleistocene forest refuge. It has a lot of endemic species. And there are so many ecological processes taking place, and the forest is evolving. And that's what makes Bwindi a very important conservation site and World Heritage Site.
Mountain gorillas live in Uganda, Rwanda, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. And they live in two populations. One of them is the Virunga volcanoes, which is the first discovered population. And then Bwindi is home to 43%, just over 400, just under half of the world's endangered mountain gorillas. So altogether it makes about 1,063 mountain gorillas. You don't normally see gorillas up in the trees, they're normally down. So we've got them literally getting out of bed because their nests are just here, where they went to sleep. They slept here last night. We're really pleased that the numbers of gorillas have gone up over the past 25 years. And there's a combination of factors. And the Uganda Wildlife Authority, together with NGOs working in the area and the tour operators, everyone has played a role in the increase in the number of the gorillas, which is exciting.
Now, with international transport and with movement of people all over the place all the time, the potential for these diseases to spread very, very quickly is obvious, and we're seeing it now with COVID.
It's now more than ever that we really have to be careful and responsible enough to ensure that we don't endanger the already endangered mountain gorillas.
When you reach our entry points, we'll first request you to wash your hands and disinfect your boots. And we also advise that you should have 2 masks because you are going to hike. So during the hike, you'll use 1 mask. And when you reach where the gorillas are, we'll ask you to put on a face mask because you'll have sweated during the hike and so on. So when you reach the gorillas, we'll ask you to put on a face mask and we sanitize you again. And then we'll take you to the gorillas, but we'll ensure that you maintain a 10-meter distance while with the gorillas. After 1 hour of watching, and then you come back.
Gorillas do have what we call home ranges. These mountain gorillas, they are very, very close to human beings. We share about 98.4 our DNA. So there are some diseases which are easily transmitted from people to these gorillas or from gorillas to us. So when somebody is not feeling okay, is not sick, we usually advise him or her to stay behind.
Gorillas in captivity have actually contracted COVID-19, and it just shows how contagious COVID is. So we know that coronaviruses and other respiratory viruses can be a very big problem to the gorillas. They can even lead to their extinction.
We take health and safety of our clients very seriously. Remember, when you visit us, you are in the wild. So there's always all these guidelines that will be given, including, of course, not making noise, not veering away from the group that you're with, done under the supervision of very professional, experienced tour guides and rangers.
They're experienced, they know the terrain better, they know the area better. And most of them have actually habituated these gorillas. They know these families well, they know the behavior of gorillas well. And so when you are in their hands, you'll be safe.
When you visit gorillas, they're highly intelligent and you have to know how to behave in front of them. For example, don't use flash photography because that frightens them. Avoid direct eye contact. Never throw trash in the forest, even a banana peel, because they can pick it up, and if you have saliva in it, you can spread a fatal flu to them. So don't leave anything in the forest at all. I know when you're trekking, they may want to come close to you, but you have to follow the directions of your guide and always move back and be ready to not get close to them.
When you are very, very close, mostly to the young ones, to the babies, the mom or the dad, the silverback, can think otherwise, that maybe you are going to grab that baby away. So we always advise our visitors not to run. If you see him maybe trying to change their minds, there is a communication we usually make. One of it is to cool them down. There they can know that, oh, maybe it has been a mistake. This is our friends, but no running.
If you need to go to the bathroom, you can only do it when you're 200 meters away from them. And if you need to defecate, you have to dig a hole 30 centimeters deep, which the ranger guide can also dig it for you. And Gorillas can pick up many diseases from our fecal matter: cholera, typhoid, giardia. They can even pick up COVID from our fecal matter. So we have to be very, very careful.
Yes, we shall estimate 10 meters distance.
When you come to visit them, you should come when you've tested for COVID, because it's such a contagious disease, and you should be fully vaccinated.
Even if you are vaccinated, we advise that you put on your mask, because the mask will protect gorillas, the staff and community members from COVID in the first place, but also the other respiratory diseases that the mask will help us to protect the gorillas if we put them on. So please never remove your mask. You need to keep your mask on through the entire time.
You have to be a minimum age of 15 years old to trek. Children under 15 carry childhood diseases, and we do not want to make the gorillas sick.
This is a very fluid situation. I would encourage that if you're listening to us, please check in on our Ministry of Health website. They have daily updates, and we require that you follow the standard operation procedures for the fight against COVID.
One of the initiatives we have come up with is called the Gorilla Friendly Pledge. During this time, we want tourists to commit themselves to follow the standard operating procedures to ensure that we all protect the gorillas.
We are asking people to take the pledge to minimize the risk of disease transmission. Once you pledge to observe mountain gorilla visitation rules and you live up to that commitment, to that pledge, when you're out there in the field before the gorillas, you observe these rules. So what happens is that you put on your mask, you keep your safe distance, you're contributing to the protection and survival of the mountain gorillas. And in the long run, you're also contributing to the protection of the habitat.
A good guest becomes a partner in conservation, and this not only involves treading lightly when you're visiting them so you don't make them sick, and allowing them to carry out their natural behaviors, but also supporting the communities that have to learn how to coexist with the gorillas, because by giving back to the communities, you're giving them an economic incentive not to have to enter the forest to poach and destroy the gorillas' habitat. Because not everybody benefits from the tourism industry, not everybody can be a porter or ranger or sell crafts.
When you visit the mountain gorillas, you're going to one of the highest priority biodiversity hotspots on our planet. And by engaging in ecotourism and working with local communities, we're making a major contribution to helping these wonderful, unique areas survive into the future.
We acknowledge that you, our partners and our tourists, are one of our greatest assets that we have. And I believe you will have a lasting memory of Uganda.
Oh, that is a lucky show.
Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I'm Pat Wright, and I don't study gorillas, but I do love them. And I have seen the Bwindi gorillas, and they're just fantastic. But the reason why I'm a lemur expert up here introducing Gladys is because Gladys and I have been friends for a long time. And it's such a treat to have her here speaking about her work. You know, she started getting interested in gorillas, I think, when she was a little girl. But she went off to the London Royal Academy to become a veterinarian. And when she came back to Uganda, she worked with the Uganda Wildlife Authority for years to help save the gorillas and all the other wildlife in that beautiful forest of Bwindi Impenetrable Forest. And then in 2000, I think it was 2003, she established her own NGO. That NGO is called Conservation Through Public Health. What? What is that? In 2003, it was a totally new idea to actually save animals and save people by attacking the real disease, well, the real enemy, which is disease. That was in 2003, and that NGO has gone far. It's amazing how much Gladys has been able to accomplish. She and her husband have worked hard. And you've seen the gorilla coffee that's on sale outside. It's because she's worked with the communities, directly with the communities to help their economy. And then the extraordinary accolades started. I think it was 2009 when she got the Whitley Award. That's like the gold standard for conservation awards, especially for young people. Then she's had a BBC show just about her and her work with the gorillas. In 2018, she got an award from the Sierra Club so that she was part of Earth, caring for the Earth. In 2021, she was the United Nations champion of the Earth. In 2022, she won the Edinburgh Medal. And in 2023, maybe some of you don't know this, but she's a finalist for the Indianapolis Prize for Animal Conservation. I was very lucky to win that. In 2014. So I work across the water from Gladys in Madagascar. And of course, if any of you want to come to Madagascar, you are all welcome. And I will accept interns and people for visits. So if you want to see those lemurs, they're not that far away from Gladys's wonderful gorillas. But I know all of you are anxious to hear from Gladys and to hear about her work. She's amazing. I'm so proud to be able to introduce her. Gladys, come on up.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Pat, and Alison for the wonderful gorilla trekking film. It's so exciting to be back here in New York, and it's so wonderful to see you all here. I know many of you. Thanks for all the great support. I arrived on 19th April with my husband, Lawrence, and we had an event at Cheryl's home in Soho to launch the book. Very exciting. It was a dream come true. And it was a great introduction, and it's just so great to be here. I actually first got to hear about Wings from an Explorers Club member called Milbury Polk when they nominated me to be a Wings Fellow in 2011 when I got the Humanity Award. So it's just nice to see everybody here today and to really talk about my new book. This is the first book I've published with me as the first author. I've actually been wanting to write for a long time, and can you hear me properly? Yes, okay. And you see that the book is divided into 4 parts because after working in Uganda with my first job as a first vet for the Wildlife Authority, I thought, I have such unique experiences, I really want to publish a book. But then when I started a zoo medicine residency in North Carolina State University and North Carolina Zoo, I had no time to write. We're working every day except Sundays. And then I thought, okay, then maybe I'll be able to write a book afterwards. But then we started the nonprofit, Conservation Through Public Health. And then I got married, I think, before we started the nonprofit, or around that time. And then we were going to have a baby. And so one of my friends' friends said, you can't have a baby and start an NGO at the same time. Yes, you can, right? So that kept us super, super busy. And then finally, after all these years, Conservation Through Public Health is celebrating 20 years this year. Very, very. We don't know where the time has gone because it's still very exciting. We're still doing so many things. We still feel like we're not there yet. We're not yet a mature NGO, but so many people have supported us, including Wings, Explorers Club, and there's also Chris who's come today, so many people here. And then I just thought, I think it's time to write. Then the pandemic began, and that was another issue. But during the pandemic, I realized that I really need to write, and I got COVID during the pandemic, and that made me realize we're not always going to be around forever. And so that got me more excited, gave me a lot more energy to just write. So my book is divided into 4 parts. The first part is becoming a conservationist. I don't know how old I was when that photo was taken, but I was on my mother's shoulder, and I grew up in a family of people who are high achievers, and I was the last born in a family of 6. They actually thought that I wasn't going to, they thought my parents had stopped having children, because my sister, my eldest sister, was 20 years older than me, and then the brother who followed was 18 years. Actually, his son is here today, Willie. Stand up and... He's a lawyer in Manhattan. And then I came along, and apparently my siblings were very embarrassed. They told my parents, why are you still having kids when my mom was pregnant? But when I came, I was loved. And my other niece is here, Nabada, stand up. So they were the first 3 generation, Peter, Betty, William, and Peter. And my dad was in the first parliament after Uganda gained independence from the British in the 1960s. And the president of Uganda used to send him to all these missions because I think he thought he was the right person to represent Uganda. So I really love this photo because he was in China at the time. And because once we gained independence from the British, the Ugandan government went to the east. They went to USSR, which is now Russia. They went to China and all those other countries to shop for Uganda, Yugoslavia, and that was one of his trips. And then he ended up heading the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association for 2 terms, for 2 years, and there he was with my mom. And my mom was very active with him. She was also into politics at the time, but as the spouse of her husband. And I grew up with many, those are my 2 elder siblings who were closer to me in age. My elder brother really liked animals as well, Katerega, so he always used to bring stray cats and dogs home, which I fell in love with. And then that's my grandmother. Most people in Uganda live like that, on the right, over here. She was my father's mother, and I was named after her. It's a name called Naluboa. And she was carrying me. We had gone to visit her. Most people in Africa live like that. And my mom told me that she was very brave. She used to chase elephants from her garden. I don't think I remember meeting her, but when we moved elephants, my mom was like, those could be the same elephants she moved, but that was a fantasy. And this is one of the last photos taken unfortunately, of my dad, because he was tragically murdered by Idi Amin when he came into power in 1972. And I was only 2 years old at the time, so I actually don't remember my dad. And because he was a prominent minister in the previous government, Amin started to kill people who he thought were a threat, and my dad was one of the first people. But I grew up knowing that I had an amazing father who really wanted to help the country, and I felt like I wanted to continue to do something, to continue his dream through my passion for wildlife. And his dream was to develop Uganda and make it very prosperous. My mom later joined politics, and all the family kind of tried to continue that legacy. I grew up with many pets at home, as I said, and one of them was very unusual. A typical vervet monkey. I mean, they're all over the place.
But this particular vervet monkey taught me a lot about primates. He belonged to the Cuban embassy. They were across from us. The Cuban ambassador and his wife acquired this pet vervet monkey. They called him Poncho. And Poncho used to like to come home, and because in his home there was only just him and his wife. So he used to like coming home because he was a little child and there were many animals. So he used to I was fascinated by how similar his fingers were to mine. And he used to like pulling the cats and dogs' tails and stealing food from the kitchen. He was a very naughty monkey. But one time I was practicing the piano and I felt like I wasn't alone, which is a feeling I've had all through my life since I started working with wildlife. And I saw that Poncho was looking over my shoulder at the window. So I went out of the room to see what he would do, and he sat down on the stool and played a note on the piano. I was like, wow! This monkey is very intelligent. Of course, he ran back again, but that was when I started to get fascinated by primates. I think I was probably around 8 years old. So at the age of 12, I decided I wanted to become a veterinarian, and then at the age of 18, I got an opportunity to revive the wildlife club in my high school in Uganda, and we took the children to Queen Elizabeth National Park. That time, there were only 3 national parks in Uganda. There was Queen Elizabeth, named after the Queen of England, Kidepo Valley, and Murchison. And when we went to the park by Uganda Rail, which was quite an experience, we got there and found that there were no predators, so we could even go on walking safaris. And they explained to us that a lot of the animals had been poached during the Idi Amin era. Idi Amin actually used to hunt animals in the park. He used to go into the park and shoot elephants, with other presidents in Africa, and it was very, very sad. And so the animals had been poached, and then when the President Nyerere's army overthrew him, the soldiers ate even more animals. And so they said, unfortunately, and even the elephants went to DRC, they thought it was safer than Uganda. And so, but this made me feel like, I think I want to be a vet who also works with wildlife and bring back the animals to how they used to be. And so around that time, I also got to hear about the mountain gorillas, because we knew that the Virunga gorillas had been discovered, but a warden came into the wildlife club offices and said, we have mountain gorillas in Uganda. And I was like, oh, that's exciting. I would like to see them. He said, no, they're not yet habituated. But it took a while before I actually got to see the gorillas, as you can see. But I got a chance to work with chimpanzees. I did my vet school in Royal Vet College, University of London, and you're allowed to work with an animal of your choice in the holidays. So I got a chance to work with these chimps who were victims of the bushmeat trade in Uganda. And a lot of chimps were basically, when they're eaten in Congo, the mothers are eaten, and then the babies are left behind because they're too small to eat. And then they try and sell them to people who feel sorry for them. And so they end up in the zoo. So in this zoo, there were all these chimps, and these chimps were very intelligent. They also used to like escaping from the cages because they were flimsy cages. So when you're not looking, they'd open, go outside, and then they want to be carried back in. So that was also very, very interesting time. And actually, the Jane Goodall Institute helped to support the chimpanzees a lot during that time, and I'm so excited that she's written the foreword. And then I finally got to work with animals in the wild, but my first grade ape I worked with was chimpanzees under Professor Vernon Reynolds in Budongo Forest. And that was very, very exciting for me, getting up early in the morning, collecting chimpanzee dung. And I got a lot of support when I was there. Everybody was looking after me because my mom told them, look after my daughter. She's a very protective mother. That time I was like 22. And then 2 years later, finally the gorillas were habituated, and I could go to Bwindi and study them. And actually this photo was taken in Bwindi because sadly when I got there, I got a very bad cold and I couldn't visit the gorillas. And I was like, what is going on here? I said, I only have 4 weeks. What if I never get to see them? My supervisor was Dr. Liz McPhee, who used to work for Mountain Gorilla Vet Project in Rwanda and was now heading International Gorilla Conservation Program. And she introduced me to everyone and said, you can't go in when you're sick. And they collected fecal samples until I felt better. But there I was taking a walk at the waterfall, which is something else you can do when you visit Bwindi. And that's my first gorilla. It's not a very good photograph, but it's an emotional photograph because this was the first mountain gorilla I saw. He was called Kachipira because he had a broken hand, and he was on his own. It was really weird that day. There were only 2 gorilla groups habituated for tourism, and we went to Katendejere group, and we went with the tourists because those days you never had an advanced team. And we first went to the nests, we collected samples, and they asked me so many questions. I suddenly became an expert overnight. And then we got to the gorillas, and Kachipira was there eating a piece of wood, and he was so accommodating. And I felt a really deep connection. I was like, wow, mountain gorillas are special. And we collected fecal samples, and by the end of it, I realized that I understood how tourism is supporting gorillas, because there were 2 gorilla groups habituated for tourism and 1 for research. And I was based at the tourist site, because that's where Dr. Liz McPhee was based. She did leave me there and go away and came to pick me up after 1 month. So it was a very good experience that I had already been through that in Budongo with a lot of people around me, and I was in Bwindi just with the Peace Corps volunteers. But I realized, and sometimes the tourists would invite us to their lodges for tea to talk about our work, and I saw how much tourism was supporting the local community. There was a very big air of hope in the community. They were so excited because the only form of employment was the tea factory, and a lot of them had been poachers, and they'd just been hired as rangers. So we used to call them born-again poachers because they were earning more protecting animals rather than killing them. And there was just this air of hope. There were a couple of community lodges, and people were selling crafts. It was just a very exciting time for me as a vet student, that I was based at the tourist site, actually, and not the research site. But I found that gorillas visited by tourists had more parasites than those visited by researchers, and I wondered whether it could be stress, because it wasn't really human-related parasites. And then I wrote to the executive director of the Wildlife Authority, and I said to him, this is what a vet does. I want to be the first wildlife vet in Uganda. And he's like, I was surprised. He wrote back to me and said, your job is waiting for you. I'm like, what? After I'd sent him my research report, because I didn't expect him to react like that. And he told me, yes, we're thinking of hiring a vet. I think I made it happen quicker than it was going to happen. So I finally went to Uganda and started working. But of course, as soon as I arrived, couple of months later, he said to me, now we have a vet. We have 2 elephants which are eating people's crops. The first lady has called me. She wants us to move them. She wants us to kill them, and she wants us to get rid of them, basically. And so he's like, but now we have a vet, we should move them. I'm like, whoa, I've only been trained cats and dogs and cows and horses. How am I going to move elephants? But luckily, I got a chance to work with Kenya Wildlife Service, who had a vet unit that had been functioning for a few years, and they're moving elephants from Mwea Reserve to Savo. So I got experience with them, and then came to Uganda, and we moved elephants. And we worked with an animal capture expert, Clem Kodzia, from Zimbabwe, who had trained the Kenyan vets and Zimbabwean vets how to move adult elephants. So that was very interesting. But later on, I always got referred to as the first female wildlife vet. I was actually the first wildlife vet in Uganda, who just happened to be female. And so it was a very exciting time, though. And then we got to move giraffes, because there was only 1 female left in Kidepo with 5 males, and they were very concerned that if the female died, there would be no more giraffes in Kidepo. So that was the next big adventure. And again, we worked with the KWS to move giraffes from Lake Nakuru National Park to Kidepo Valley National Park, which was also very exciting. And actually, that's when BBC filmed our work. And the giraffes were successfully translocated to Kidepo, which was a very exciting time. And this was recorded by BBC and National Geographic. And later on, Animal Planet also did something else. And so this was the first book about my life. And I was a co-author with Charlotte Rolfe. She was writing books about women in male-dominated professions for children in Africa. But my nephew Willie actually asked me to speak to his school about this when he was like 8 or something, when I happened to be in America. And they also wrote about engineers and pilots in Africa who were women, and that was very interesting. And then, but one thing I can say, that working with the mountain gorillas was not as straightforward as it seems, being a vet for mountain gorillas, because everyone felt that you should leave wildlife alone, you shouldn't touch it. And, it should all be left to natural selection. But then we eventually came up with a criteria that if it's human-related or life-threatening, we should do something, because at that time, there were only about 650 mountain gorillas left in the wild. And so when it was always a very, very big debate on whether or not you should intervene, the biologists, of course, were very protective, which is understandable, also with the chimpanzees. And I learned so much from them by the end of it. But the first case really, which everyone had to agree it's okay to do it, was they sent me a message that the gorillas were losing hair and developing white scaly skin. And so I asked a human doctor friend of mine living in Kampala, who had also trained in the UK, what is the most common skin disease in people? She's called Dr. Catherine Sozi. And she told me it's scabies. And I was surprised because in UK, no one got scabies. Occasionally they'll get it from their pet. And we used to treat their pet for sarcoptic mange, but it wasn't common. And she said low-income groups of people in Uganda get scabies because they have poor hygiene and they don't wash their clothes often. So we went with the drug for scabies, the wonder drug, ivermectin, which is good for parasites, but not for COVID. And I went with Dr. Richard Koch, who was training the KWS vets, Kenya Wildlife Service vets, and he had seen a lot of manging. He had seen manging cheetahs that are visited by many tourists, but none in the cheetahs that were not visited by tourists. So we went along thinking maybe it's due to stress. This group had only 4 gorillas and 6 tourists coming to visit. But because the mother, Nyabitono, was so shy, she wouldn't let us near her infant. We had to dart the juvenile, who was scratching even under ketamine anesthetic. And it looked like mange because 2 tourists to the group, one was the head vet of St. Louis Zoo, Dr. Eric Miller, and his partner was a small animal vet. She saw lots of cases of mange, and she said, this is mange. We invited them to join us for the intervention. And this was the very first intervention of gorillas in Bwindi. And then we treated Kachipira, and sadly, the baby was dropped a few days later. And even though the baby had died, the mites were still alive. So it was a severe infection of mange. And we started to wonder, did it come from the community? Maybe it did, because this group was always going outside the park. We also had cases like a rectal prolapse in the gorilla, and we didn't know whether they got a human parasite which caused the gorilla to strain to defecate. And even there was a debate whether or not I should intervene, because some people said maybe the prolapse is bad genes, and you're pronouncing bad genes on already endangered population. And eventually I just said I just have to take, a decision, because for welfare purposes. I treated Kahara, and she got better. And she eventually left the group and went on to have, hopefully, will have 6 babies in her lifetime. Because also in conservation, women are more important than men, because the females are going to have babies, the males may not. So it's only the ones that are lucky to be a dominant silverback or something. But after that, everybody was happy that I saved her life, even those who had said we shouldn't intervene. But this made me think more closely, are they picking up diseases from the local community? Because this is actually a banana plant that was destroyed by gorillas, the most popular gorilla group, Mubare group. And I asked that farmer, do you still think gorillas are important? He said, yes, my son is employed as a ranger, and some of the money from tourism goes to support schools, clinics, and roads. But the individual farmer like me, I'm not being compensated. They even brought tourists to see gorillas in my garden, and I didn't get any money. So I saw how bad he felt. I gave him like maybe $2, because that's what I had in my pocket, 5,000 shillings. And I told my bosses, and he became one of the first human and gorilla conflict resolution members. And so this still continued to happen. And then everyone said to me, why don't you set up a health education workshops for the local community? I was the only vet in the organization at the time. So I went ahead and did it. And that was a big introduction for me into public health. We met with 1,000 people in 8 villages, and these were the villages where gorillas were always coming out. And it was a great eye-opener for me, because as a vet, I'm used to solving people's problems. So I told them, this is the problem, and we went together with a community conservation warden and ranger and district health assistant. And then I was about to tell them, this is the solution, and they said to me, he touched my hand and said, let them come up with a solution. And they came up with much better solutions that I was going to propose to them. And that was like very humbling, because I realized that if they propose them, they're more likely to follow them. But a lot of what they propose is what we used to start the NGO, Conservation Through Public Health, because they wanted health services to be brought closer. They wanted to strengthen the human-gorilla conflict team that chases gorillas back, and they wanted continuous health education. I didn't realize that people lived so far away and they couldn't get health services. When they got sick, it was a 20-mile walk, carrying somebody in a stretcher to the nearest health center, so they would just go to traditional healers. And this is quite frequent. You'd find these little boys, they're supposed to be in school, but they were herding goats in the garden. And as long as you had poverty and poor health care, the gorillas were not going to be safe. And so that's when my One Health journey began. And we founded Conservation Through Public Health in 2003. And some of the biggest threats we've had to face, I realized very early on that habitat loss was a big deal. Because when we got to Bwindi, I felt like I'd reached the ends of the earth, because it was a 10-hour journey from Kampala. And it was right at the Congo border. I'd never been to a place like this before. And this is all around the park, it's like this. So when it became a national park, people were not allowed to cut trees anymore. It used to be a forest reserve, but now people couldn't cut trees anymore. But gorillas come out, because once they lose their fear of people, they come back to the places they used to be before gorilla tourism began, and before their forests had been cut. Poaching is also an issue, but actually in Uganda and Rwanda, poaching of great apes isn't such an issue, because it's bad luck for the Batwa hunter-gatherers who lived in the park. They said it was bad luck for them to look in the eyes of a gorilla. So they would avoid the gorillas, but they would set snares for the gorillas. Set snares for other species like the daika or the bush pig, and gorillas could get caught. And then they had to be put outside the park when gorilla tourism began. But in Congo, once they cross over to Congo, there was danger of them getting eaten, because in Congo and other countries in Africa, they believe that if you eat a gorilla, you become as strong as a gorilla. So even people very high up, even the elite, still have that cultural belief, and that contributes to the bushmeat trade in Congo. So this particular gorilla, Mwirima, was heading the Rushegura gorilla group, and he was actually outside the park, because there's so much, as the numbers are growing, they're ranging more and more time outside the park, and he was next to the gravity water scheme. So they do mix a lot with people. And then this is Kanyonyi, one of my favorite gorillas. When his group was the very first group to be habituated for tourism in 1993, and he was born in 96, and he used to like frightening tourists to see their reaction when he became the silverback. And unfortunately, Kanyonyi died. He fell off a tree, and he never got better, and then in spite of treatment, and then he got into a fight with another silverback who took over the group. So he died of natural causes. It wasn't gorilla dynamics. It wasn't human related. But when I shared his tribute on Facebook, we got over 300 shares, and people shared their photos, because he was such a well-known gorilla. And it just showed how far tourism has gone and how much people appreciate the gorillas. So CTPH, this is a view from our office, if you get a chance to visit, for those who have visited. And this is almost the whole of, we can see right up to the south side of Bwindi. It's 321 square kilometers. And inside here, you also have elephants, chimpanzees, over 200 species of butterfly, over 300 species of birds, and 4 species of monkeys. So it's a very important water catchment area and climate modulator. Within it, we have 3 integrated programs: wildlife conservation with a focus on wildlife health, community health with a focus on One Health, addressing the health of people, animals, and the environment together, and alternative livelihoods, where we started a gorilla conservation coffee program with farmers. And so we continue to train the rangers in gorilla health monitoring, and they collect samples from all the groups every month, and also when it's abnormal, and we train them to identify gorillas. That's actually the US ambassador to Uganda, which is Steve Browning with his wife, and they had come to visit the very first gorilla research clinic we built when we got funding from USAID through African Wildlife Foundation. A few years later, we were able to build a more permanent center with support from TASC, and we started hosting students to study parasites and stress hormones, and this is our 3rd founder member, Stephen Rubanga. And then this still continues in the gorillas. So we engage the gorilla guardians, and we train them to also monitor the health of the gorillas. So whenever they're in community land, they collect fecal samples, and they monitor their health. And so they're all a part of the solution. And then we started training village health and conservation teams. And we're so glad that was an opportunity to engage women in conservation, because it's a health issue. So they tended to get women involved in health and men in conservation. But with our kind of approach, we could engage women and men equally. And so they visit people's homes and talk about the importance of being healthy and hygienic. They also talk about the reason how we can prevent ourselves picking up diseases from wildlife by not eating bushmeat, but also not making the gorillas sick. Because the community has benefited so much from tourism, they see the gorillas as their future. But they also talk about things like family planning, because people had when we started out, people were having 10 children per woman. Could you believe it? So many children. And they just couldn't, but someone at the age of 25 had 5 kids. Someone at the age of 36 has 10, and they look much older than they should be. And of course, the children, they'll even tell you half the children are to go to school, half have to chase wildlife from the garden. So the family planning program was very important. And we trained them working with the local health centers. Dr. Lynn Gaffikin had supported projects in Madagascar, integrated population health and environment projects, working with CI and World Conservation International and World Wildlife Fund. And so she helped us to set up the family planning component of our work. And we found that it's also empowered women in the community. Because when I first went out to talk to the community about the health issues between people and gorillas, I could hear women whispering, we need to educate our daughters. Because here was a woman leading a team of men. And a lot of the girls there, by the age of 15, they're pregnant and they don't have a future. And so I was glad that through our work, we're able to get women to be inspired to educate their daughters. So that we use these kind of flip charts showing a family with too many children. And, she's even pregnant even if she has all these kids, and half are going to school and half are not. And then when the gorillas come into the garden, they try and chase them away, and these gorillas grab children and people. Some of these things have actually happened. It's all based on reality. And then with the good family, they always call the Hugo members to safely herd them back. And the good family has 4 children, the bad family has 11, going on to 12. And they're like, which family would you rather be? So that really helped to change behavior. And now women are not having babies every year. They're happy that they have more control over their bodies and they can start a business, and men are happy that they're better balancing the family budget. So I think it's really helped. And then family planning injections was the most popular contraceptive, because someone would get to the health center and they find an overworked midwife and she won't give them any medicine because they're too busy dealing with sick children. So they go back home and conceive. So now we train our volunteers to be able to give injections in the comfort of their own homes. And they started to sustain, they asked us for group livestock projects, and then when CARE came along, they started their own village health and village saving and loan associations. And the program has continued even without donor funding, at a low level, but at least the donor funding helps it to just keep going and going. But even in between donor funding cycles, they don't have salaries, but they're keeping on going. So as we speak now, we're engaging over 270. We started off with 26. And then we have research studies. I think you can recognize Alison is there, interviewing tourists to see if they're willing to wear masks. And that resulted in a gorilla trekking film you just saw 10 years later, because they were showing not a very nice film. And Alison said, I need to come back and bring a better film. And then COVID came, and her research showed that over 50%, I think 51% of tourists were willing to wear masks. I supervised her together with somebody from Oxford Brookes University, Professor Kate Hill. And then a few years later, another student found that now 73% were willing to wear masks, because they would go to Mahale Mountains in Gombe, and people have started to wear masks. So even DRC started to do it before Uganda. So when COVID came along, we really forced the issue. But we're proud that around, by the time COVID came along, this was now 2018, the mountain gorilla population had really grown. And this is something that we're very excited about, because I participated in the very first census when we counted 300 gorillas in Bwindi. And the population has continued to steadily grow. It's slowly getting to double. And unfortunately, the rest of the mountain gorilla subspecies are going down because of hunting. There isn't any community engagement. It's really quite bad. But we believe that if the tourism model and the One Health model and other community benefit models, even such as gorilla conservation coffee, can go to the Eastern Lowland, Western Lowland, and Cross River gorillas, we could reverse the trend, working with all the various partners, the government and the many NGOs and the tour operators in the area. And how do we sustain conservation? I talk about this in the book. This is the 4th component of the book. Again, we decided to name our first brand after Kanyonyi, my favorite gorilla. And actually, he died when we had already launched the product. So someone said to me, are you going to change the name? We said, no, because his legacy will live forever. So if you happen to visit our gorilla conservation cafe in Entebbe, it's all branded with Kanyonyi everywhere. He's very famous. But it just shows how far tourism has gone. And if you protect gorillas like Kanyonyi and his family, it will be a win-win situation for both the animals and the people. And so it's a global coffee brand. My husband Lawrence actually came up with this idea because whenever you'd go to check on gorillas, you cross coffee farms, and they often tell tourists as you're going up that this is an Arabica coffee tree, this is a Robusta coffee tree. Most people have never seen a coffee tree. How many of you have seen a coffee tree here in this room? Okay, that's quite a lot. And how many have seen gorillas in the wild? Okay, so a lot of people, a lot of people haven't seen gorillas, they haven't seen coffee trees, but when you come to Bwindi, you can see both. And people are very excited about it. So we decided to develop a global coffee brand that can save gorillas one sip at a time. And these are the two first farmers we worked with. And now we're working with 500 farmers. And they're very happy because we found that some of them were still going into the forest to poach and collect firewood because they weren't getting a good price for their coffee. So it's easier to just go and hunt a dike or a bush pig and get meat rather than trying to sell their coffee. And during COVID, we were able to get a buyer from UK. And over here, we have one of our buyers from US, John. He just ran out just before COVID. John, can you stand up, please? He was our first US distributor before even COVID began. And then in 2021, he started to distribute again. And now he's handing over to Credo, who have just started like this month. And we were able to keep farmers going even if there were no tourists during the pandemic. And so though gorilla tourism has been an amazing opportunity, here are people standing 7 meters away. We did some research and found that 60% of the time tourists go too close, even closer than 3 meters. And 40% of the time it's the gorillas who broke the rules. And this was because they're so accommodating. They grew up seeing tourists like Kanyonyi, and they're very curious, especially the babies. And so we found when the pandemic came along, we were very worried that they're going to pick up COVID. Remember, everybody was debating, social distancing. Those were the big words. And so we led the effort to advocate for the upgrading to mask wearing. And Alison's research really helped, and Annalisa's research really helped. And the government was like, okay, if we're going to continue tourism, we have to have mask wearing. The park was closed for 6 months because of lockdowns all over the world, but also because they were concerned about COVID spreading between people, but also to the mountain gorillas and the chimpanzees. So our NGO served on the Ministry of Health COVID task force, and we were able to advise the government because once we spoke in the task force, the messages went to the president of Uganda, and every time he gave an address, there was always that consideration for wildlife. So I was so excited when I was on the screen when he actually said, we're going to open up for tourism after 4 months, but not yet to gorillas and chimpanzees because we shouldn't make our cousins sick. And I was like, whoa. After all those years of advocacy, the president of Uganda knows that this is a very important issue. And so we continued also distributing these brochures. We tested the gorillas, we tested the people living around the park, working with health partners, and luckily they didn't pick up COVID. And we continued to work with the gorilla guardians who had gorillas back, because the gorillas didn't know that there's COVID. They still went to people's gardens. But I felt I should say that they have resisted having women joining the human gorilla conflict team. They said women will faint when they see a gorilla. Could you believe it? I'm like, I haven't fainted all these years. But so there's still a ways to go with bringing about gender equity. But we've trained all these people in COVID-19 mitigation, and we're part of One Health essential workers during the pandemic. But sadly, this gorilla was killed, Rafiki, because he, once tourism disappeared overnight, the Bwindi community had come to depend too much on tourism. So when it disappeared overnight, they were stuck. So like the porter who carries your luggage to the gorillas, it's very important to hire them, even to support the local economy. His dad is a reform poacher. And as long as his son is bringing money home, he won't enter the forest to poach. And now his son isn't bringing money home, so poaching just went up. And we did meet with the women, and they did say that they do urge their husbands to poach when there's no food. And he wasn't poaching the gorillas, he was poaching bushmeat, like duiker and bush pigs. But he speared the gorilla when the gorilla charged to protect his family. And so when we checked on Rafiki's group, we found that they were now headed by a blackback, and some gorillas left the group
now heading
because they...
including a gorilla group.
some gorillas left the group because they didn't want to be in a group that's not headed by a silverback. So the whole group was disrupted. But what I really liked was that porter who I hired to carry my bag had a mask saying in memory of Rafiki. So most of the community were very angry that he killed the gorilla. But he went into jail for 11 years, which is the first time anyone has ever gone to jail that long for killing wildlife in Uganda. So a victory for conservation. But as long as there were other bushmeat poachers who were hungry, it could continue again. And that's when we went into food security and started providing fast-growing seedlings to over 1,500 households. And with the first 1,000, we gave them a questionnaire and asked, why are people poaching? And they said people are poaching because they're hungry. So this is something that we're continuing all through the pandemic. Responsible tourism is something that I also talk about a lot. I have a chapter saying, is tourism a necessary evil? But during the pandemic, people are now wearing masks, but we encourage tourists to also buy people's crafts, just like the video said. And we launched a policy brief on responsible tourism to great apes during the first IUCN African Protected Area Congress in July last year. At this panel, we had 2 tour operators, Praveen, who's well known to Explorers Club. He's the founder of Volcano Safaris, and Manzi in Rwanda with Wilderness Tours. And then there was the deputy director of Rwanda Development Board and the chief warden of Bwindi. And they were discussants. And now we want this approach to go to all the 13 countries in Africa that have great ape tourism at 33 sites. And I believe Madagascar is one of them, which has tourism to other primates. And so women in conservation, when I started out, there were no female rangers at all. I was a strange person in conservation in 1996 because I was out in the field. The women were only at the headquarters, desk jobs, and not going out to the community, or maybe not going out to the gorillas or other wildlife, just sticking to the community. But I'm glad that now 20% of the ranger force is women. And this is one of them, Goretti, highly dedicated. And this was the first day we started wearing masks to visit the gorillas. I also took our 15-year-old son. He had never seen gorillas, but although he had been going to Bwindi since he was a baby. And so he got to see them finally. And we've really empowered women. So now they're really excited about conservation, and we engage 50% women, 50% men, and we're happy to bring about gender equity. I'm on the Leadership Council for Women from the Environment Africa. On here, there's Dr. Leila Heza, who's also a Wings Fellow, and she initiated this and got us all to be involved. I think some of you know Dr. Colleen Begg in Mozambique with Nyasha Carnival Project. And then Rosette was the very first female head of ORTPN, which was the Rwanda National Parks. And so we're trying to mentor women to realize their leadership potential in conservation and environment. And that was one of our first cohorts. And we're also strengthening African leadership in conservation. I'm glad that Dr. Bill Constance is here because he was there at the second workshop in Entebbe, because we find that a lot of people never attend these conferences and the wildlife continues to go down. So we need to build their leadership. So when they become members of parliament, they will advocate not to cut down trees, to plant sugarcane, which is happening in Uganda right now. It's a very big debate. And so there we were, and Dr. Rasmus Hammer is the patron of the APS. We had the minister there, the Japanese ambassador, and I was heading that committee because I'm the vice president of the APS, and the president is Dr. Inza Kone from Ivory Coast. So we've continued to build African leadership. We're proud to have hosted